I'm Mariefiebach of FeedYourFamilyTonight.com, and today we're going to make something out of nothing. Well, not quite. We're going to be making bone broth out of chicken bones that are left over from a rotisserie chicken. You could do this with any kind of chicken bones that you have left, but rotisserie chickens are so simple and so easy. So if you happen to have a rotisserie chicken, save those bones. I took all of the meat off of my rotisserie chicken and I was left with about 2 cups of bones. And if you have a little bit of meat left on the bones, that's totally fine. It's going to add lots of flavor to your bone broth. I don't usually like to put the skin in here, but if you like the skin and you like it a little bit more fatty, you definitely could add that too. But I just have the bones of 1 rotisserie chicken, and I'm going to put this into my slow cooker. Then we're going to add some of the things that are going to add depths of flavor. Often at the bottom of the bag of the rotisserie chicken, there's a little bit of juices, and I definitely add that because that adds lots of flavor to this bone broth. And I like to add a few vegetables. I usually add 1 onion, and you can actually leave on some of the inner parts of the skin. The outer part I like to slice off, and I like to slice off the root. You don't have to chop this up really finely. I usually cut it into quarters and then just put it straight into the slow cooker. Same with my carrots. I scrub them really, really well, so I'm just gonna cut the top part off, and I'm gonna cut them into chunks, 2 or 3 pieces for each carrot, and I'm going to put that right into the slow cooker. Then I usually like to add a couple of cloves of garlic. And again, you can kind of leave the peelings on. It's not going to hurt anything, but I do like to cut them in half because it gets a little bit more of the garlic exposed to the water. The last vegetable that I like to add is a little bit of celery. And what I do when I have celery throughout the weeks, I keep the inside leaf part, the part that you're usually just tossing, I put it in a little zip top baggie and I keep it in my freezer. And then when it's time to make bone broth, I just take them out of the baggie and I put them in. It's kind of a way to reuse something that you would have just discarded. I have a couple of spices that I like to add. I add a ½ teaspoon of whole peppercorns. And then this one's a little bit unusual, but I add 6 whole cloves. Now, if you don't have whole peppercorns or whole cloves, don't use the powdered ones because it will cause your bone broth to be a little bit murky. If you don't have the whole spices, you can just omit them. It won't make that much of a difference, but the whole cloves and the whole peppercorns do add a depth of flavor to this bone broth, and it's one of the tricks to make it taste extra good. The last ingredient is just water. For 1 rotisserie chicken carcass, you're gonna add about 6 to 8 cups of water. Basically, you want to make sure that the water is covering all of the bones and all of the vegetables. You're gonna put the lid on your slow cooker and you're gonna turn it on high for about 1 hour until it starts to boil. And then once it's boiling, turn it down to either low or keep warm. And you really like to have it on the lowest setting possible because you really don't want this to be boiling vigorously. You just want it to simmer and bubble just a little bit because this is going to cook for 12 to 24 hours. The longer it cooks, the richer and deeper the bone broth is going to be. After 12 to 24 hours, you're going to turn off the slow cooker and you're going to take off the lid. And I usually use a pair of tongs to pull out the big chunks of vegetables and the big chunks of the bones, and then you can just discard them. They're going to be soft and mushy at this point. Then you're going to take a fine mesh strainer, put it over a bowl or a container, and you're going to ladle out the rest of that bone broth to strain out any of the spices or smaller leaves from the celery and smaller pieces of bone. And you're going to end up with this rich and thick bone broth, just from things that you would have discarded. You can keep it in your refrigerator for up to 2 days, but it does spoil quickly. So I usually prefer to keep mine in the freezer. It's really important though, before you put it in the freezer, make sure that you let it cool down to at least room temperature. You don't want to put hot bone broth straight in the freezer because it's going to get into that danger zone of 40 to 140 degrees and sit there for too long, and that makes it a little bit more susceptible to bacteria, which we don't want. So if you're going to put it in the freezer, let it cool down in the refrigerator until it gets to at least room temperature, then put it in the freezer. It'll hold in the freezer for up to 2 or 3 months, but this bone broth is so good. I use it for soups. I use it when I put in stews. Sometimes I even use it to cook things like rice. It's so versatile, and it's a nice, inexpensive way to get chicken broth. The full recipe is at feedyourfamilytonight.com. And if you have any questions, you can join me in the Feed Your Family Tonight Facebook group.